Hello, students. The next concept in our journey on the SAT would be mastering the modifiers on the SAT. So, the first question that we need to ask is, what are modifiers? Well, as the name suggests, modifiers are nothing but things that modify. Things that modify phrases, parts of sentences that modify, or words that modify. Modify what? Modify any subject. Modify any subject. So, simply speaking, anything in the sentence, anything in a sentence, any part of the sentence or a word in a sentence that basically modifies any subject in the sentence is called the modifier, right? So, let's see what are modifiers. Modifiers changes, clarifies, qualifies, or limits a particular word in a sentence in order to add emphasis, explanation, or details. Simply speaking, the simplest modifier probably are the adjectives or the adverbs. These are the simplest one-word modifiers that we may have. But generally, on the SAT, you would not have a single word modifier that they'll test you for. It'd be a phrase, a modifier phrase that you'll be tested for. So just to illustrate how you can add modifiers to a pre-existing scenario, let's take a sentence which says Sarah was a sure fit for junior prom queen. Now, considering the same sentence with multiple modifiers added, a blonde girl named Sarah, giving property to Sarah to start with, who was a foreign exchange student from England, again giving properties to Sarah, quickly climbed the ladder of popularity during her junior year. Again, thing that probably has been added an additional information, smiling her way through cheerleading, blah, blah, blah. And finally, the idea of the sentence comes at the end. So it is like modifier plus modifier plus modifier, and then what the original sentence was all about. So the extra information, extra wee bit of information that we are adding out here in this simple sentence are the modifiers. Most of the times what SAT tests you for are modifiers which are necessary in the sentence, or modifiers which are integral part of the sentence, not the ones which have been added forcefully, as in this case by me, to make some understanding, clarity of what modifiers are. So let's look at some faults or some defects that SAT checks you for when it comes to modifiers. So let's look at two basic faults of modifiers. The first one is misplaced modifier, which involves the order of the words and phrases within the sentence. So there is a sentence and there is a part of the sentence which is the modifier, which is misplaced, right? It should be at a particular point in a sentence, but it is not there in a particular point, it is there in some other point. So 1, 2, 3, probably the sequence should have been 2, 1, and 3, something like that. This part should have been before 1 and 1 should have come here, something like that. So this is what misplaced modifiers are all about. And the second one is dangling modifiers. Dangling modifiers have a modifier. In every in the sentence, it will have a modifier, but the subject to which the modifier is referring, the reference subject, is missing. So in this kind of a scenario, it involves the modifiers, but the subject to which the modifier is referring is missing out of the sentence, and hence the modifier has been left dangling. It has been left in the middle of nowhere because it doesn't have a subject to suffice. So these are two possible mistakes on the SAT. One, the misplaced modifier, and two, the dangling modifiers. So let's see some examples of misplaced modifier. The first sentence says, one morning I shot an elephant in my pajamas. It is a very, very famous quote by an English-British comedian. So, if you read through the sentence, you will find that one morning I shot an elephant in my pajamas. Now, there is a follow up to this sentence as well. If you see the movie in which I'm referring to, it says, how it got there, I don't know. How it got there, I don't know. And that is the follow up sentence. I don't know. Right? That is a follow up sentence to this. But looking at this sentence directly, one morning I shot an elephant in my pajamas. Now, in my pajamas is referring to the elephant in this case. In my pajamas is directly related to the elephant. So the sentence would read something like this, that the elephant was in my pajamas when I shot the elephant. That is definitely what, not what I meant, because I'm quite sure that an elephant would not be able to get in my pajamas, even though I've gained some weight. So this is incorrect, and the modifier in my pajamas has been misplaced somewhere. After being beaten and deflated, the baker shaped this and seasoned the dough. Very good. After being beaten and deflated, the baker. So who was beaten and deflated, the baker or the dough? Right? So misplaced modifier. She wore a bicycle helmet on her head that was too large. Now, was the head too large or the helmet too large? That is the question. They bought a kitten for my brother. They shall call Shadow. They shall call Shadow what? My brother shall be called Shadow, or the kitten shall be called Shadow. Classical examples of misplaced modifier in sentences. What about dangling modifiers? The dangling modifiers reads something like this. Riding in a sports car, the world whizzed by rapidly. Now, who was riding in the sports car? That is unclear out here. So this has got to be rephrased so that a subject, while I was riding, something like that. There are a million ways in which this could be actually improved, but while I was riding in the sports car or something of that sort should have been the case out here. Walking home at night, the trees looked like spooky aliens. So walking home at night. So again, a misplaced modifier. Who was walking home at night? The sentence almost looks like as if the trees were walking home at night. That definitely cannot be the case. So now I'm leaving the other two to your discretion. You can pause the video and see what's wrong in the other two sentences. Correcting modifier errors. Though this is not a part of the SAT, but then we need to understand what modifiers are and how actually they would get corrected. So let's look through a red, a yellow, and a green sort of sentences. So let's look at a wrong sentence first. George Carlin both shocking and entertaining audiences across the nation, who also struggled publicly with drug abuse, influenced and inspired a generation of comedians. Actually, the sentence doesn't make any sense. It is completely confusing. So George Carlin, the name of whoever he is, both shocking and entertaining audiences across the nation, refers back to George Carlin. Again, a very, very, very strange sort of a sentence. So basically, we will put this as a wrong sentence because it's very difficult to make out what the sentence means. There is a better way, the yellow one. Both shocking and entertaining audiences across the nation. Again, who did that? George Carlin, who also struggled publicly with drug abuse. Again, referring back to George Carlin, influenced and inspired a generation of comedians. But then this is still a yellow because this one, which again refers back to George Carlin, is not with George Carlin. It is with who also struggled publicly with drug abuse, influenced and inspired. Very important that a person who is struggling publicly with drug abuse would really not influence and inspire a generation of comedians. So this should again be connected somehow to George Carlin. Now let's look at the green one. Both shocking and entertaining audiences across the nation, George Carlin influenced and inspired a generation of comedians, yet struggled publicly with drug abuse. Yes, so this is the best of the three. So, but then there are multiple ways in which you can correct the sentences. Grammatically, you really cannot say that this is incorrect. You really cannot say, though this doesn't make a lot of sense, this could be actually given a wrong, but then this one probably cannot be really said that this is grammatically incorrect, and this one is probably the best one out of the three. But SAT, don't worry, is not going to give you correct ones as options. Most of the options would be incorrect and only one of the options would be correct. Some uncommon things about modifiers, but yet worth understanding. There is 1% chance that SAT is going to ask questions on these ones, but then still we would not leave it to our fate. Words that are countable for things we use, and words that are uncountable for things, right? So for a hat, say 1 hat, 2 hats, 3 hats. This works. Hat is countable, right? And 1 patience, 2 patience obviously doesn't work. Stop, right? So basically, if you're looking at a word, say 1, something of that sort, anything which is cardinal, it cannot come with things that are uncountable. So this does not work, as patience is not countable. What about using between and among? So you use between in a sentence wherein there are 2 distinct individuals. So individual A and individual B will get a between. As in this one, the students who chose between individual A, B and C, right? This is how between works. But then if there is a group wherein you don't have distinct individuals, it is going to be among. So students who chose the top HBCUs. So these are not distinct A, B, C type. So that then there we generally use, and not generally, we actually use an among. As I told you, there is 1% chance. These days SAT has migrated from asking idiomatic uses or idioms to words in context. So there is only a 1% chance. The old SAT used to have this one. There's only 1% chance that the digital SAT is going to ask you such a question. Still, we will not leave it to our fate. The next one, which is the third one, is a demarcation between greater than and more than. More basically is a comparative adjective, while greater is used in numbers. So the rare Montauk beaked griffin is not extinct. Its numbers are now suspected to be much greater than before, not much more than before, right? Much more. The more will be is a comparative adjective. So more and most, which is the superlative adjective. So you don't use a superlative or a comparative adjective because we are referring to numbers and not more and most. So when you use a number, it has got to be greater and not the comparative form. And the word increase and decrease are not the same as greater or less, obviously, because the price of silver increased by $10 and the price of silver is $5 greater than the price of copper. So this is how it is used. There are petty concepts on the SAT that may be asked. Stay tuned. The next section will be the most important part on modifiers, when we actually do the modifier errors as subjected on the SAT.